It's a very fresh, nuanced view of history because you're right, there's this simplistic assumption that there was only one group that had power and authority and won that. But there was this constant push and pull. You've explored a similar push and pull with women in history as well. Once again, similar assumption that men were in control and women were just passive agents. But as you've explored with the lives of, you've explored the matrilineal societies in Kerala, you explored the life of Sethu Lakshmibai, Junior Rani, Rani Chennamma, Begums of Bengal, also explored the role of Devdasis in community. Within the patriarchal context, there was push and pull. These are people that had some power, influence, some amount of privilege. So how does that change our view of women in history as well?
A lot of women are not written about, partly because the social mores of that time wouldn't allow for them to be written about. It was considered bad form in some places to write about women. So even if women actually did things, it would not make it to the record because it is not considered proper to sort of talk about those things. Forget matrilineal. Even in patriarchal settings, you find that women have ways of asserting agency despite the odds being stacked against them. So say a lot of these Maratha queens, for example, I give in my book False Allies the story of Jamnabai. It's not even that long ago, 19th century figure. She's 13 or 14 years old. She's a teenager, not from a very rich family, but she has the right blood. She comes from an old elite family. Her father is just a village headman, but she has the right bloodline. The then Maharaja of Baroda has married several times, doesn't have children, so he's going to try with one more wife. And this girl is chosen because she has the right bloodline. He has the money and status. Just as in Mysore, they wanted Rajput blood and they were happy to get a Rajput woman from a smaller setting. Similarly here, he had everything. He just needed a girl and a bride from the right kind of stock. So he gets this girl called Tanhibai. She's given a new name called Jamnabai. When she's 17 or 18, this Raja dies. She's still in her teens. She's not that much older, but she's pregnant. And so now this creates a political friction with her brother-in-law because the brother-in-law thinks that the Raja's dead, I should inherit the throne. But she's declared that she's pregnant, which means it's not clear who's going to inherit. If she gives birth to a male child, that child will inherit. Otherwise, it's this guy. The result is that he tries to poison her, etc. She starts cooking her own meals, sleeping with a dog chained to her bed, eventually moves to the house of the British agent in Baroda because she doesn't trust the palace servants, and she gives birth in the British resident's house. But when she gives birth, it's a girl. Now, this woman is still 18 years old. She doesn't give up. She doesn't say, okay, I've been defeated. Let my brother-in-law now become the king. I'm just going to retire into the harem and live the rest of my days in the harem. She doesn't do that. What she has is the jewelry and other goods that her late husband has given her. With all of that, she leaves Baroda State and moves to Pune. Sitting in Pune, she starts liquidating these assets that she has for money and paying people to complain against the Maharaja, paying people in the British resident's office to tell the British resident negative things about the Maharaja, pays for the press to criticize the Maharaja, and essentially mounts a campaign against her brother-in-law. He's also a bit of a rotten egg, so that makes life easier for her because many of these complaints come from legitimate grievances, but she just gives a push to that. She becomes a catalyst for negative publicity against her brother-in-law. And within 5 years, the brother-in-law is toppled. And this woman, now in her 20s, comes back to Baroda with her elephants and her goods, and she is now in the driving seat. Again, being a woman, it is lopsided. She can't rule because the British are like, no, you have to find a male heir to rule. So she and the British come to an understanding where the British don't want a grown man because then they also can't control the future of the state. But she also doesn't want a grown man because she wants someone she wants to control. So they get rid of the grown options that are available and they find a 12-year-old boy in Nasik, somewhere near Nasik, who's distantly related to the royal family, illiterate boy working on a farm, pick him up, put him on the throne. And she's calculating that because he's a teenager, she can shape him and eventually control him. The British are making the same calculation. The point is, she's got agency. She's a woman who has a mind of her own and she's got her own cards in play. So, born in a village, daughter of a village headman, essentially given away as a womb to a Maharaja because she has the right bloodline, etc. Fights a brother-in-law, gets rid of the brother-in-law, negotiates with the British, gets rid of other rivals to the throne, gets a small boy in power. When he grows up and becomes his own man and doesn't, eventually after a while, it's clear that he's not going to be manipulated by the Jamnabai. She tries to then, team up with the British again to put him in his place. That doesn't work. And finally, she eventually fades away. But even in the very fact that she made that much of an effort, it is clear that she isn't a helpless woman in a harem, unable to sort of do anything. With the resources available to her, she is trying to do things.